Hey everyone, welcome to the Social 333 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bentley. Today I got Tony Kassaei.
Whoop, whoop.
How you doing, Tony?
Fantastic. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks for coming on to the show. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background and what you got going on?
Well, gosh, when you hit your mid-40s, it sounds like the story gets longer and longer. You always start a new chapter, but for me, it started with Wall Street. Had about a 20-year record on Wall Street. Had my own firm, started Morgan Stanley, UBS, then went independent, and then just a chain of events and how life works out that kind of led me into what I'm doing now and the podcast world, the media world, the health and wellness world, and what brought me here to the great state of Texas today.
Nice. I wanted to talk about the trading because we talked a little bit off air about it, but I trade a day trade and I have my own capital management company. And I saw on your Instagram some stuff about like insider trading and like you were kind of privy to a lot of that stuff and you saw a lot of that stuff with like CEOs when they went public. Talk a little bit about that, about, kind of what you see, what you've known. I mean, I'm not supposed to talk about insider trading, but it happens, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't do insider trading, right? But like it does happen, right?
Yeah.
So leaks do come out, people know each other kind of stuff. But like, tell me kind of what you've seen at like a higher level.
Quick question. Do you have your Series 7 or do you have any kind of licenses that they could yank from you?
Oh,
For
yeah,
say?
yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. So for me, and I'm sure this will resonate with you, there's certain things that you cannot talk about because it is kind of like the mafia. I always talk about, overall the SEC, FINRA, et cetera. They are empowered by Congress. It's a for-profit organization that's been put there to technically protect the investors. But if you think about all the scandals you've heard on Wall Street, from Enron to Wells Fargo, where the agents were being paid to open up fake accounts and billions of dollars of fines, yet you never saw investors get a check for any of these fines. You never saw anybody go to prison. So it's always kind of like this thing that to where, unfortunately, the advisors often get thrown under the bus. And they're constantly playing this game of what do we have to fill out? What do we have to say? And how do you keep yourself out of hot water? But the really billions of dollars of manipulation happens at the higher level. I never did high frequency trading, or I was not a trader. I was on the retail side. I brought in the billion-dollar relationships, and then I would hand the clients over and pick the handful of assets that I was allowed to sell: stocks, bonds, mutual funds, annuities, managed money, et cetera. But during that time period, high frequency trading was coming around, et cetera, et cetera. So you start hearing about all these things that are there that the average investor doesn't hear about. And I'm sure you understand how that works. And it was literally these guys that would have facilities that were the closest to Wall Street, that had the fastest way that they could put in these trades. And it was all legal. It was all algorithms and shit like that. I can curse here. Yeah. So that's from a trading standpoint. For me, where the writing was on the wall, being on the retail side, you've seen Wolf of Wall Street, you've seen all these movies, and it's all true. I've been in those rooms, and unfortunately, during the time period that I was at a firm out of Atlanta, REITs were really big, and there was a company called RCS that they had damn near 15 different REITs, from the Wall Street REIT that they were buying up all these buildings during the recession. They had Walgreens REIT that they were buying up all the Walgreens and renting them back. But come to find out, when these things were at the compliance officer's desk, we would be at the St. Regis, and the dude would have the penthouse suite, and there would be hookers and cocaine, and the compliance officer was there. And then all of a sudden that's on, we can sell it, and you're getting free tickets to God knows what for being the top sales guy. Every single one of those REITs went to shit, went to zero. They'd raised billions of dollars, and these investors are left holding the bag. And who would refer them those investments? We had, because the compliance guy said right, and the investment guy at the firm had approved these products, et cetera. And none of those guys squash the whole thing. That was just this little empire that they built off smoke and mirrors. And a REIT, as you'd raise $100,000, the investors would get 7% dividend, but it was almost like a legalized Ponzi scheme, if you think about it, because there wasn't enough revenue. They were counting on acquiring more assets, but somehow they were allowed to give these dividends. And during the Obama era, they changed the rules where you have to do this thing called mark to market. So these investors would give you $100,000, they'd get paid 7%, and 4 years later, their investments were still saying $100,000, but they were still getting their dividends. After that rule changed, now their investments would say 83,000 because the load was 17%, and you cannot take 17% off a real estate investment and all the other BS fees that are attached to it and expect to get a return. So, it was an interesting run, and you do see a lot. So off the top of my head, those are two, but you have 8 more hours on the show. I'll tell you the rest.
I was around with like the pump and dumps, and then you would like subscribe to all these newsletters, and I would get like my inbox would be like just filled with like new pumps every single week. And then like what one of the guys that I learned selling from or trading from, like he would short all the pump and dump. So like he'd watch it, he's just like, oh, this is totally a scam. We're just gonna totally, they're gonna
Yep.
dump at some point, and they would just short it, and he would just be on the short box and be just nailing it for like 2 or 3 days until they pump it back up and they get out, kind of deal. I've seen that. I've seen, and I've heard about this where you can subscribe to like a newsletter or like a news, magazine or whatever that comes out about stocks, and they have like the news before the news actually hits like the internet. So like if you pay, I don't know, $5,000 a month or 10,000 or whatever, $50,000 a month, you get the news before it even hits like the internet. Like I just heard some wild, wild, wild story. I'm sure it's like all true.
Not only is it all true, it was all that's at the smaller scale, right? Like you are a smaller guy, if you will, right? You didn't manage billions or trillions of dollars, but I would see that at even the highest levels. I remember when I first got on at Morgan Stanley, I think I was 22, 23, and one of the guys that had the top corner office and the biggest office, we called him a dinosaur or stock jockey, because by then managed money had rolled around and you couldn't justify charging somebody $1,500 to pick Exxon or Microsoft. Everybody had information, the same shit. But this guy had a brilliant model. He had 5,000 clients, and on any given day, he'd call half of them and tell them to buy Nike, and then he'd call the other half and tell them to short Nike. And 50% of the time he was right. And his model was, well, shit, half the time, the guys that you're right on, they'll let you fuck up 3 other times. But the guy that you're wrong on, he'll still let you be. So you'd have to be wrong 3 times to lose that client. So you'd have, at 50% of the time, he's a hero to half those clients, charge them whatever he did. And now he gets another 3 to 4 times to be wrong. And that was his investment philosophy, and there wasn't as much compliance and rules.
Right.
And, I'm sure that's not allowed now, or maybe it is, but there's variations of that at every level, from the retail to the institutional, and then you get to the higher ups. And you see what Pelosi's doing now with, there's a guy that I saw this invented this whole algorithm and software. It was on Instagram, and he's literally getting access and buying whatever Pelosi's buying, things up like 43%.
Oh yeah.
And it's so, it's allowed at every level. It's still there. So
There's some chat rooms, there's some Discord, there's some I've seen Twitter followers, they'll create a whole channel that's just following representatives of the US, like they know stuff before everybody else, and they're just buying options.
And I can only imagine now with AI, right? So now you have, they can impersonate voices, you can call and get insider tips pretending you're the CEO. I mean, there's God knows how many different ways they're going to figure out how to scam the average retail consumer.
That's the next thing I wanted to talk about was FinCEN. So FinCEN obviously comes in, they audit, the branch, the books, all that good stuff. And I get hit with FinCEN. I get hit with, when I was working at the bank, I would get hit by OCC. And they come in and they look at stuff. And when my friend was working at FinCEN, they had this thing where they would get a bonus depending on how much they find wrong at different levels. So they didn't go into like a particular branch or a particular trading firm or capital management company looking to, be like, hey, you did a poor job here, do this a little bit better. They were looking purposely for fines so that they can get, bonuses at Christmas time, which I thought was ridiculous. And that's what they do.
Yeah. That's what FINRA is. And like I said, if you Google who empowers them, they have unlimited powers. When I went through my FINRA investigation, there's no limits to what they could ask for, financial, personal email passwords. And when they don't find anything, now they want to find something.
Yeah,
and
you're in
that's where
trouble.
they will keep, they can audit you every 2 months if they want, and they can make your life hell to the point where it's like you kind of figure out, like, is this even something I want to be a part of anymore? Because You're not looking out for the investors. You're not going after the things that could actually help these people. You're worried that I dated a document wrong or that the suitability was off by 10%, when really it's that investment that you're putting in front of me that you're allowing me to sell, but you're incentivizing the due diligence manager, and they're allowed to sponsor all our Aruba trips and my top producers that have been all over the world because I sold the most shit that you let me sell that turned out to be a pile of shit. So
Right.
that's the part that nobody talks about, that
Yeah.
nobody
At
goes
all.
after. And I'd write a book and compliance would come back and it's like Susie Orman wrote it. I'm like, that's not even my book anymore because I couldn't talk about that. So until I told FINRA to fuck off and said, you know what, I'll take my lifetime ban, take all my licenses because now I can tell my story. I can have podcasts. I can help other people. And for the first time, people were reaching out. Oh man, I went through that, or I'm glad you warned me about X, Y, Z. So it became a little bit more satisfying. But
I think one of the toughest things for financial planners or people that talk securities is that they can't talk about it.
yeah,
They can't talk about performance. They can't talk about anything. All they can say is, the spiel, and then, but, you know,
yeah,
you have to judge each performance by blah 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 and all, like the huge, spiel. I got audited. I did a podcast and I just had an episode. I talked about, that I had great performance, blah blah. Literally like 2 days later, I had somebody in my office and wanted to look at the books, and they looked at the books, and I was right. Like, I'm a numbers guy. Like, I know my numbers, and the numbers that I spit out was correct. I didn't want to spit it out.
yeah.
It just came out, which is really, really interesting. That
Yeah, nothing I'm talking about today I could talk about if I was still licensed,
Right.
at least from my standpoint. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about the new stuff you got now. So you got regenerative medicine, and I saw that you kind of like made the pivot a little bit from being the Wall Street guy to now doing this. You're at a convention right now, or like an event that you're hosting right now.
Yeah, for when I left Wall Street, it was very abrupt. And this is a much longer story, but I found out one of my former partners that I'd been business partners with 10 years before, during the recession, he went and did his own thing. I did my own thing, but he was buying and flipping real estate in Southern California during the recession. So at some point he ended up with 30, $40 million worth of assets.
Wow.
We reconnected and I'm like, holy shit, did you win the lottery, et cetera? Says, no, I'm taking these dog crap mutual funds that were paying zero. Back then CDs were paying zero. And
Right.
so he would give him 8% on first trust deeds. He wasn't licensed. So he would buy a house that from auction for 200 grand in Southern California that was really 900,000, fix it up, put a tenant that would cover his 7 to 8% he'd give the investor, hang on to it, and then 3 to 4 years later be worth 3 to 4x. And so little by little I'd give him some of my friends and family money, some of our mutual clients that we'd gathered together. I mean, him and I had known each other for 20 years. He was in the World Trade Center when the plane came in.
Oh, wow.
On the 60th floor, Morgan Stanley, when I was there. I was there 7 days before. I was in one of their training classes. You ever seen the movie Pursuit of Happiness? That was pretty much my life.
Wow.
And that's where that character, I mean, that's a real story, but he was a Dean Witter. And so Dean Witter was Morgan Stanley. So that was their headquarters. We were the largest tenants, I think, from the 40th to the 80th floor, Tower 2.
Wow.
And so I was there. I still have my badge that I left, I think, September 2nd or so. And 11 happens. He's there. That's where we bonded. He made it out alive, jumped over the bodies, but had a horrific story of getting out that building from a first hand. And so that became our bond. We went to UBS together, Citigroup, and started our firm together. So when he did his own thing, we had a lot of history together. We'd bought a restaurant together, et cetera. So I ended up giving him about 3 to 4, maybe 5 million of friends, family, mutual assets that we'd had together, that instead of buying real estate through me, which I had a mutual fund of real estate, that he would essentially develop it. I wasn't given any compensation, but it was just somebody I knew. Long story long, a dude ended up starting a Ponzi scheme.
Oh,
It
wow.
turned out to be one day one of the interns came to me and says, I got to tell you something. Usually when a guy says, I need to tell you something, he either had sex with your wife or girlfriend, or he wants to borrow money. In this case, I was like, it's not the first one, but maybe he wants to borrow some money. It was way worse. And he starts crying and says, this is what it is. I'm like, well, how's that possible? My mom owns that fourplex. He goes, yeah, but 5 people think they own the same fourplex.
Oh, wow.
And this was somebody that was like my brother, dude. It's like I'd buried his wife or his mom, and we'd spent Thanksgiving, Christmases together.
Wow.
So, there was a huge, that was, this huge pivotal point in my life. But from that point on, the firms had my back. FINRA never had a problem with it because this was his thing. And after he got sentenced and got sent away for about 4.3 years, $12 million, $23 million restitution, et cetera, nothing happened to me, et cetera. But because I had cooperated to give him the documents, to give him the time that he deserved, uh, on his way out, he called FINRA and said, "Hey, this was my partner, and he'd referred me
Oh
clients, and you know how
no.
that starts." So,
Yeah.
then it became 3 years bank records, 5 years bank records, seven, then 10. Every transaction, $300 from 8 years ago. I'm like, dude, what do you want? And they
Right.
kept going. 3 years, but I'm still had my license. But you're not gonna like every day you're looking over your shoulders, you know
Yeah.
what's coming. And then so yeah, man, long story longer, one day now it's during COVID. I'm in the third day of a FINRA hearing online, and it's supposed to be live in Boston, but because of what was going on, I have my FINRA attorney, the SEC's attorney, FINRA on Zooms, and they couldn't get that everything they had, they'd spent all this money to come after me, but it was all bullshit because this was his way to get back at me. And so, dude asked me for my personal passwords from my Yahoo account that I've had for 30 years back in the AOL, when it was dial
Yeah.
up.
Right.
And I'm like thinking, gosh, I have a lot of personal stuff, people that have opened, sexual shit. Like there's so
Right.
much, and who knows who's going to have access to this for the rest of my life, right? So literally told the guy to fuck off, slam my thing down, and told him just, I'm done with you guys. Like, if this is how it's going to be. And my attorney's like, dude, they've spent millions to come after you. They haven't got you on shit. They're going to be up your butt the rest of your life
Yeah.
if you
Till
want
they
to know.
find
Until
something.
they find something
Right.
or until you're just so paranoid that you slip up. So from there, I ended up, I met a great mentor, and he just said, hey, man, American Greed had reached out to me. They'd offered me multiple six figures to tell the story. And
Wow.
a producer had reached out, and my mentor was like, why don't you just get on stages, write a book, start a podcast, help other people, share the stories that you have. And that's what kind of took me down and then a show in iHeart. During that time period, one of the guys that I was guest speaking with on stages, he was doing the stem cell therapy, and I'd heard about it. I didn't know if it was legal, not legal, but I know it helped me with my torn meniscuses. One of my good friends out here, Steve Kuklo, is #3 in the world for Olympia. I used to speak at some of his events sometimes out here. He's had the Kuklo Classic down here for 10 years, which is a qualifier. So in the bodybuilding world, I'd been around it, and it helped me with my knees. So I started looking into it, and a buddy of mine came up to me and he says, look, man, this is the kind of the wave. And now what you see with RFK coming out right on the day of the elections, putting the FDA in notice saying stem cells, peptides, exosomes, like we're lift cannabis, psilocybin, we're now going to be allowed to have access to this stuff. So it's been about the past year and a half building out the network, and now we do seminars and teach people how it can help you get off opioids, et cetera. So it's been really rewarding, and I feel like we're just at the kind of the ground floor. But it's interesting the journeys life takes to get you to where you're at right now.
Oh, absolutely. You have like a lot of pivots, especially if you're like entrepreneur, small business owner. You have pivots. Like I'm experiencing a lot of pivots, and I just, I had a guy on the show last week, and he was talking about how you just get bored. Like it's just not that you're getting bored, but like as an entrepreneur, you're just like, okay, well, cool. Like, been doing this for a long time now. I want to do something different, and you just like, even though whatever you're doing is working or not working, you just get bored. It's
Yeah.
just kind of how it is. It sounds like you're doing really, really well. And like you do these seminars where you just like invite a lot of people and like people come in and they're just interested in stem cells, or do you guys do stem cells while they're there? Like, how does it work?
It's really, and I believe that, there's a higher power, God, fate that puts me in the right rooms. I was actually coincidentally enough out here in Texas for the Tyson fight against that clown. And, it was an amazing experience. The stadium sold out. The energy was hype. And I had, I think, tickets 6 rows back. So there was a lot of higher end people there, if you will. And I met this gentleman, Dr. Chun, out of here, out of Texas. He has 3 brick and mortar locations, and he was a pain double board certified anesthesiologist, and he's got a successful practice out here. He testifies at the Senate level many times on the behalf of both patients and doctors. So he's a prominent person out here. Him and I just kind of, just grabbed a drink in the VIP room, started talking, told him about what I did. And he said, man, I've been wanting to get into that, and in his world, he saw the value in that. He didn't know really how to access the stem cells and exosomes and have that right team. So he became my conduit to it out here in Texas, because I'm not a medical doctor, but obviously I need that person to administer and to kind of build that brand around. So for me, the seminars and marketing was something that I could attach to him. And so we started something called the Regenerative Institute of America. We just launched that out here in Texas, and the goal is to kind of go nationwide with that here with the first several states coming up.
What's like a typical um, like experience? Because I've looked into stem cells. I have really bad. I have one really bad hip, and I looked at doing some stem cell to my hip, and then I ended up changing up my diet to a carnivore diet.
Mm-hmm.
So like that ended up getting rid of like a lot of inflammation that I have in my body, and that helped out a lot with my hip. But obviously, I like to get more. Um, but how is that like? What is the experience? Because I've always been interested. Like, do they just shoot that right into you? Is it different stuff? I know that Dan Blazarian, he would fly to like Costa Rica or Nicaragua or something and go get stem cell injections because we weren't allowed to have it in the U.S.
Right.
Has all that kind of changed now, where I can just go somewhere and get stem cells, and then get I have an issue with my hip. Can you go shoot me up with some stem cells? Like, how does that kind of work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's actually three pronged. So you're right. I think about, over the past 20, 30 years, unfortunately in this country, we're driven, as we know, by big pharma. So the lobbying that they done, it was always telling people that these stem cells are coming from aborted fetuses. And if you want to make something controversial, if you want to make something that there's money behind, like big pharma, people to be afraid of it, you attach it to something like abortion, obviously, and aborted fetuses for that matter. It turned out none of that was ever the case. It was never aborted fetuses. There's no human DNA attached to the stem cell. There are countries that do that. The efficacy of that is highly controversial, and it doesn't really work. There's cancer-causing agents and that, et cetera.
Mm,
The type of stem cells that are legal in this country finally, and when you see CPI down in TJ that Joe Rogan promotes, Tony Robbins sends a lot of people to the Panama Institute. These are typically what we call cord blood, Wharton's jelly, where it's just the umbilical fluid or the placenta, or you have to have the baby to get the product. You can't abort the baby and get it, right? And it's full consenting female adults, screened for COVID, test, et cetera. So there's no politics around it. There's no ethical concerns, right? But that's what they were telling everybody during the Bush era. When Christopher Reeves fell off his horse, that's what he wanted to get. But they were telling everybody it's illegal. So it was highly controversial, but Kobe did it. All the athletes were doing it. They disappear and come back. Jack Nicholson, countless. And during the seminars, we talk about this too. So it took a little bit more of the mainstream catching on, the science getting behind it. But now the answer to your question is yes. It's the way that you utilize it. There's still some gray area how you could market it. So it is still considered experimental use. It's essentially, I cannot say that I'm curing or treating any type of disease. So the way that the vernaculars around it. But at the end of the day, if you decide you want to take that to lower inflammation, et cetera, there's claims that can't be made around it. It's not my fault if it helped you with X, Y, Z. Does that make sense?
right.
So for me, to give you my personal story, I had 2 torn meniscuses, both knees. I couldn't do anything on my knees, much less tie my shoes or bend over without crickety cracketing. And it was affecting my life. Definitely couldn't snowboard anymore. And so when I met Steve, he had a doctor that was doing it up in his room. We went up there, it took 10 minutes. He did an IV. And within 3 to 4 weeks, I was able to get about 80% of my range of motion back. What we do now is a combination. So there is exosome stem cells that are all derived in FDA-approved labs through FDA-approved clearance standards of how they curate the material, if you will. And so it's either an IV or direct injection. So for me, I did directly into my knees, and then I also did an IV. And I do that about once a year, once every 2 years. I've done probably my 3rd treatment right now over the past 2 years, and I can definitely go snowboarding again. And it's not a cure-all. It's not a magic potion. So I think if it's marketed and you have a doctor like Dr. Chun that's credible, that you have access to, there's ways to do it. Now there are, unfortunately, because there is so much ambiguity around it, there's a lot of people that are marketing it in nefarious ways or sending people to TJ. The treatment, for example, that they're doing in Tijuana that you see heavily promoted is about a $30,000 treatment that we can do here in the States for less than $15,000.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because what's the pricing? Because I've heard some pricing where it's like 30 grand to
Exactly.
like get
Yeah.
stem cells. I've like what? I mean, I know every place is different, but like kind of give me like an idea, ballpark. Like somebody comes in, they screwed up their shoulder lifting weights, and now they gotta, instead of them going to get scalped, they're gonna do some stem cells. Like, what does that usually cost? Like, is that like obviously there's a treatment?
About $5,000 to $15,000, depending on how many trigger points you have, or double knees, shoulders, back, etc. But typically, our clients are spending on average anywhere from 8 to 12. The lowest is about 5. The highest is about 12. Overall wellness, sexual wellness. There's very specific things that it can help with, and where it's administered. Believe it or not, they actually do it directly into the penis for ED, for sexual wellness, erectile, etc. So there's different protocols for what you do. What we do is we just offer a free consultation. They fill out an intake form. Somebody reaches out to them. They fill out a 2-page questionnaire. Doctor reviews it, puts together a protocol, and they know. So there's no, smoke and mirrors. Insurance does not cover it, nor will they, because again, it's a big
Right.
pharma thing, right? So,
Yeah.
and I think it'll be quite a while before insurance does cover it.
What have you seen? Like, obviously, you've seen some patients come through. Obviously, you've seen some people that were pretty beat up, and then they come up. I know you got your story. I've heard stories where people are just wheeled in
Yeah.
somewhere, and then they get up.
Yeah. You see that all the time, and again, I never can make claims. All I can show is testimonial videos, and
Right.
we literally have hundreds. Carly, who's sitting here, we have. I can send you videos where the patients are hitting her up after she was there as part of the treatment group or the seminar group, and they're thanking her, unsolicited, unpaid. We don't ask for them, but they'll send it. Well, the lady had Parkinson's and she was shaken, hadn't been able to feed herself for years, and
Wow.
after her first treatment. I had a lady that we did, actually, Steve Kukla, who still lives out here. He brought a bunch of people he trains. He had a gal, I think she's probably, I guess, mid to late 50s, and she hadn't been able to move her arm. And 30 minutes after her exosome treatment, it's 180 billion exosomes that she got in an IV. Within 30 minutes, she just said, "Hey," I said, "Can I take a video?" She said, "Yeah." So I have it on my phone, and she's like, "I'm doing this now and doing this, full range of motion." She
Wow.
calls her husband, pulls him off the golf course to come in and do it. So it's very rewarding, especially coming from Wall Street. So it's nice to actually be doing things that you can see immediate
Hmm.
gratification, as opposed to the stock jumping up 8x the next day.
I'm sure you worked with some interesting characters too on Wall Street.
You did. Yeah, man, you saw it all. Like I said, 20 years into really anything, no matter how boring or great it is, you see the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right.
It was just, by the end of it, it was hard to think about the good anymore. And you'd been around so much of the bad.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Talk to me about like the disruption part of it, because I know stem cells is kind of like the big thing,
Hmm.
and I know just from years past, like Dan Blazarian was doing it, and other people were doing it, and now that we have a little more access to it, do you see it like really disrupting it in terms of like more of a mainstream instead of just having like events and stuff like that? Just more of, I don't know, people.
86% of all NFL players over the past 5 years have had some form of regenerative medicine. If you think
Wow.
about that stat, right? Tiger Woods, when he flipped his car, whatever the hell he was on, and then, he was supposed to be out for 3 years. The first thing he did was go get stem cell therapy. Now, I believe he went to Germany, if I'm not mistaken, spent over $100,000. The average person doesn't have that, but then we'll spend millions of dollars on homes and cars. And so we're spending more money on, on these things that we think matter, when it's really your personal health that matters more than anything else, right? So if you think about it, that the average, even on the high end, the treatment costs $15,000. It's the cost of a used Honda Accord. You're worth more than a used Honda Accord. I don't care who you are, right? So is it disrupting? I would argue yes, in the sense that more people now have access to it. It's not hidden. It's not in the shadows. You don't have to go to Mexico for it. And there's the Mayo Clinic. I mean, there's high-end institutions that now, within 5 minutes, I can pull up articles and studies to show you. There's claims. The FDA, they're like, is it FDA approved? No, but it's Food and Drug Administration. This is not a drug. It's a human biologic. It's a human tissue transplant from another human tissue cell, right? So as the more education is out there, the more people are allowed to actually do their own homework, which is something I always encourage people to do. I'm like, let me know why. It'll never hurt you. It can only help you. There's no the only side effect is how good will you feel. You can look somebody in the eye and say you will not suffer any kind of side effect, which no other pill or surgery will offer.
Does the regeneration stuff work as well for organs, not just for like limbs?
So this goes back to the claims and what you could make, right? We have seen
Or
at
have you
all.
seen
One
anything?
of the studies we show is that they've actually been able to, in a lab, recreate a human heart utilizing stem cells. Because
Wow.
again, the stem cell is something that made a baby from, a zygote
Nothing.
to doubling and doubling and doubling. So that's all it is. So it's a human growth factor. There are growth cartilage repair factors in it. The exosomes are doing something different with the inflammation. So what it can do, we're still at the infancy of the applications. There's a gentleman I'm working out of Newport Beach with, Dr. Fretch. He is now starting a research institute with one of my partners, and he is doing legal test cases from a Hoag hospital, which is nationally recognized hospital, where getting specialists from cardiology. What's the thing that all autism's right now obviously huge. We've seen this huge
Right.
spike in autism. So there's countless now testimonial videos I've seen where parents are experimental use giving it to this child, and now all of a sudden the measurable marks, the way they're communicating, the number of verbs they're using, et cetera, measurable ways that you can see it's working. So this is now at its infancy. Who knows how far it's going to go? But that's where I think it's disrupting, and I do think the healthcare industry, and more specifically the insurance companies, et cetera, they're incentivized for you to do a $150,000 knee replacement and all these things that are more intrusive, that arguably have more side effects, and you can die in surgery. So, my goal, and I think the goal of anybody that's in this industry reputably, is to recommend this as a try this first. It's not going to cost you more if you do a surgery, even if you have the best PPO. You got the time it takes you going back and forth, the rehab, the pills, the time off from work, and then the risk. And if you quantify that, it's definitely going to be less than 10 grand. So that's where I think the disruption is, and you see that now. They're taking control of their own health because it's not a healthcare system; it's a sick care system. You get
Mhm.
sick, then the healthcare system comes in. There's a code in Medicare that says we can't cover anything if it's preventative,
Right.
which is really crazy if you think about it.
The crazy thing that I've experienced is that I don't know if you've experienced this, but like you go to the doctor because you're obviously sick. That's the only time you go to the doctor,
Right.
right? And you go there, and then you're dying, and they charge you not only to see the doctor, but the rent for the building that you walked into.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you come to my office, you want to talk to me about securities, you want to talk to me about, fried chicken legs, whatever it is, and then you want to talk to me about, real estate, whatever it is, I don't charge you for that. You just come in my door. But no. For doctors, they get charged for the rent and to see the doctor. I thought that was the craziest thing ever.
The average that a person sees their doctor when you go through all that is 4 minutes. And if it's a female, it's actually 5 minutes, believe it or not. But that's how
Wow.
long the average person in America actually sees their doctor on this doctor visit. Now, when you go to your doctor, think about it, you're probably about my age. What do they often give you?
Medication.
Medication. It's a pill,
Right.
right? And it's not even what they're limited to. They're not doctors in the insurance company's eyes. They're called what? Providers. They provide medication. That's how the healthcare system looks at these doctors. It's not the doctor's fault. I hate throwing them under the bus because they're only able to offer people what they're allowed to offer people, and it's
Mhm.
typically medication, surgery, rehab, your typical things, right? So it's not that they don't know about it or want to know about it. They're limited by the way the system is built. So you do see a lot of these doctors like Dr. Chun expanding out and doing things that are a little bit more out of the box.
That's really cool. I looked at your Instagram a little bit, and I saw that you had like Snoop Dogg and Coolio, like way
Yeah,
back in the day
yeah,
and stuff like
yeah.
that. So what was
Yeah,
that like?
Coolio, rest in peace, man.
Yeah.
That dude was cool. We were actually developing a show for him, Cooking with Coolio, that we are going to pitch to Netflix. I had a show that was affiliated with iHeartRadio. So obviously in that world, there's also a cannabis component on that show as
Yeah.
well. So a lot of these guys were rolling through, Snoop, Tyson, et cetera. But I brought the Financial Fridays component to that because at the end of the day, every time Snoop gets on a show, it's like, how many joints a day do you smoke? Who rolls? It's always the same shit, right? But all these guys had business acumen too. That Snoop has his own wine, his football line, a
Yeah.
clothing line. I think Tyson came out with this new line of gummies where it's an ear with the ear bitten off. So all these guys are entrepreneurs, right?
Right.
One of my favorite interviews with Freer Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross, the guy who Rick Ross stole the name from
Oh, wow.
in prison. Rick Ross, the big rapper Rick Ross, he was a security guard while this dude was locked up for life. He couldn't read a book. They've made endless movies on him. The Nicaraguans, the CIA had funded him. He used to make $1 million a day net in LA. He created the whole crack cocaine epidemic. Nicest guy in the world. While he's in prison, he learns to read, gets himself out by becoming a lawyer practically in prison, gets himself out, and he's never done a drug, doesn't drink. Nicest guy in the world. He was going to be a pro tennis player, but he couldn't read. Never been taught to read, so
Wow.
he wasn't able to go in on a college scholarship. But played with Arthur Ashe. Fascinating stories like that, where it wasn't just the rap game. And now he's out. By the way, he became one of the only felons in LA. Shout out to him, but he's got his own dispensary now. One of the first felons that was locked away for life for making $1 million a day selling cocaine. And there's multiple documentaries on him. My episode's out there too, but I think Netflix did one now, and so did Amazon. But Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And Rick Ross, the shitty Rick Ross, I call him. I hope he doesn't come beat me up because he's a lot bigger than me. But he, like I said, he was his security guard and stole all of this dude's real ideas. He was just a shitty, like, jail security guard, like whatever they call him, but that's all the stories that he raps around, and his girlfriend names and stuff in the first story. It's actually Freeway Rick. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
But yeah,
crazy.
that world was crazy, man. But it wasn't for me, like I'd smoke occasionally here and there, and obviously Texas looks at it as it's like the most evil thing in the
Yeah.
world. But so I can't even talk about that out here without worrying about Popo showing up.
Tony, if somebody wanted to find you, wanted to get some regeneration, maybe ask you some questions on Wall Street stuff, like where could they find you?
Instagram's the easiest. I got a team, but for the most part, I answer all the DMs. It's the Insider Investor on Instagram is probably the easiest. The regen stuff, you guys reach out through me there, depending on what states you're in. I'll put you in touch. We'll get you good treated, taken care of, or at least a free consultation.
Awesome. Tony, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, man. That was fun.
Awesome.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
man. Good luck with this.
Thank you.